Actually, Harold had, I remember all kinds of advice about raising children and how one should handle them and what one should do. And I've forgotten some of it, but it's coming back as I hear this. So I remember Harold telling me his theory about child psychologists. So his theory went as follows. Well, I'll have to live with what he said. So he said, you know what's the definition of a good child psychologist? So I said, no, Harold, how do you tell? What's a good one? So he told me a good one is one that gets good results. And there are ones that get good results, he says, but don't pay any attention to the theory because it's a pile of crap, he said. But there are good ones. That's the definition, he said. Okay, so Harold, by the way, think about him as a teacher. I would just say that Harold is famous for his teaching and his lecturing and his engagement with students, not only here at NYU, but he volunteered to be a judge in science contests. He ran all kinds of things for kids all over New York, actually. And however, I do remember once asking Harold in the fall, I ran into him and I said, Harold, what are you teaching this semester? And he said to me, please, you're presuming on the result, but I'll tell you what I'm going to lecture on. Okay, so I'm going to ask next. We're going to have some students of Harold speak. So I'm going to ask Miriam Hausman to say a couple of words. She was a very devoted student of Harold's. Where's Miriam? Yeah. Who's a colleague, a professor at Baruch, and is going to say a couple of words.
I remember the first time I met Harold Shapiro. It was many years ago, my first semester here at Courant, when I enrolled in Professor Shapiro's elementary number theory class. I walked into the room, and there was this person, who, as Sylvain said, was larger than life with a loud voice. During the lectures, Harold would randomly call on students to answer his question. If you answered, I do not know, or you gave the wrong answer, what followed was not fun. Needless to say, we were all a little nervous. After a few weeks, one of the women in the class went to Harold's office crying about how nervous she was. I believe Harold was not aware of the impact he was having on his class of new graduate students. After he got over the shock, he adjusted his behavior, and then we all relaxed. Harold was an amazing teacher. He never recommended a textbook. The notes he gave were incredibly clear and all-inclusive. In addition to the mathematics, there were the stories about everything. I always felt that even if someone who knew no mathematics attended the class, they would be entertained. My role model for teaching has been Harold Shapiro. Harold's office was always full of people, students, former students, colleagues, friends, and even family. Harold was a true Renaissance man, and we all enjoyed listening to him, whether he shared his knowledge about mathematics or life in general. At 3 o'clock, it was time for tea, and we all came up to this lounge where the discussion continued. Harold deeply cared for his students, and his concern for his students extended far beyond the classroom. He was always giving us advice, both professional and personal. I believe he thought of his students as his extended family, and we in turn appreciated his fatherly interest. I consider myself most fortunate to have known Harold and to have been his student. In the language of our profession, there are constants and variables. Harold Shapiro was a constant. His enthusiasm for mathematics, his genuine concern for his students, his wisdom, and his generosity. As I think of Harold Shapiro, I am reminded of a quote from the French poet Paul Eluard, who said about Picasso's drawings, "There is no enthusiasm without wisdom, and no wisdom without generosity."